Hello and welcome to Executive Tech Talks, the show where we talk to executives about their technology tribulations and triumphs. Thanks for tuning in. Before we begin, our sincerest thanks to this episode's exclusive sponsor. And now, here's your host, Johna Johnson, who will introduce today's guest.
Hello, everyone. I'm Johna Johnson from Nemertes, and I am delighted to be here with James Kostulias from TD Ameritrade. James, welcome.
Hey, Johna. Thanks so much. It's great to be here with you.
Well, and we're here to talk about everybody's favorite topic, which is return to the office and how to handle that from a technology and process and culture perspective. And I know we've had a lot of conversation about collaboration and the human component and hybrid environments and working from home. But before we get to any of that, I'd like to sort of kick off by asking you, James, what are your thoughts on some of the infrastructure that enables the whole concept of remote working and hybrid working?
I think what we've seen is VDI infrastructure is super helpful in order to maintain desktop and laptop images within your corporate firewalls. Security awareness training was always important, but I think there are so many additional risks in a work from home environment that it's real important you update your training. Things like push updates that used to happen automatically within your infrastructure. Now you've got to be relying on employees to do some of that and ask yourself questions like what happens if they don't, and do I need to deactivate their devices? I think those are sort of some of the basics. I'd also think I challenge companies to look at the help desk model, right? One of the things we learned is when you're down in the office, you can still be productive. You can walk around, you can go to a meeting. When you're working remotely, if you're down, it's sort of a game over type of situation. And so what might you need to do with your help desk model to ensure better efficiencies for your employee base? I think there are some hygiene things we ask everybody to do on your home equipment now, right? And make sure patches are run and updates are installed. And then I'd say in a BYD environment, where you're connecting to corporate networks, obviously, can you leverage some of the partnerships you have with existing vendors on their security tools? A lot of the vendors are happy to let you sort of extend that now to leverage on some of sort of your home devices. You want to keep everything obviously as up to date as you can, but you're really more relying on your employees to help you than you've ever been before. And then lastly, I would say sort of the criticality of multi-factor. I think most people were with some form of multi-factor before, but now it's sort of not a nice to have, it's a must to have.
Yeah, no, there's a lot there, and I'd like to unpack that a little bit by bit. So you mentioned VDI, and the thought sort of leapt into my mind that VDI has been about to really go big time for the past 15, 20 years. Would you say that the return to the office, work from home, hybrid workforce is actually the killer app for VDI?
I would. I absolutely would say yes, definitively yes.
It's interesting. First of all, that is pretty darn definitive. And I know you often hedge answers, so that's a good thing. And actually, I would concur with that because I'm seeing clients make, all-in commitments to VDI, even though it's more expensive than alternatives because of working from home. So that's actually a really interesting point for people to think about. The second thing I wanted to raise, you mentioned, increased security awareness training. And actually, just this morning, I was talking to another financial services firm that is putting together an intranet that has, security tools and tips for employees. Is there anything you can think of that ought to be on that intranet other than, don't click on the links in random emails?
I think people know now not to click around within those, but what do you do? How do you report those? And again, in that type of environment on your intranet, making it real simple, or even within, if you use Outlook or whatever email vehicle you use, making it real easy for employees to report that so they don't just ignore it and sort of let it sit. That would be the one thing I would suggest. Make that real easy so that we don't get into one of those situations where the employee didn't do anything and they think that's enough. We'd obviously, all of the cyber folks would really like to actually know about real tangible examples.
That's actually an excellent suggestion. We also suggested, by the way, that they sort of turn to some of the security awareness training companies and see what they, what resources those folks have, because that's kind of what they do. So one of the other ones, I know you were talking about, I was just checking my notes, but you were talking about the whole idea of self-serve tech support.
Yeah.
What kinds of changes are you guys making, or do you see the industry making, the financial services industry making, to kind of enable employees to be a little bit more autonomous, I guess?
Help desks have probably notoriously been sort of underinvested, especially in the financial services world, where a lot of companies are throwing a lot of their resources and time and energy at client-facing apps and things like that. So the first thing I would probably think from a changing perspective would be, more resources within that space. It's just so important and leads to so much better productivity. VDI was a great example of sort of the next evolution of investment there, right, with stronger commitments. And I think the productivity and the efficiency, as people are looking to measure what's been happening in a work from home environment, I think it really sort of, the ROI becomes there to do more investment in those spaces.
Well, which is a great segue into the next question that I have, because as I say to people, well, you can see I've got the fancy headset and the fancy microphone. It turns out that when you're working from home, there's probably a couple $1,000s worth of investment per employee to give that quality experience on video calls. Now, not everybody needs headphones and a fancy mic and a ring light and a green screen, but actually quite a number of people do need that, so that you just don't get eye strain and stress staring at somebody who's badly lit, and you can't really see them. So what recommendations do you have in terms of how to decide what tools need to be in a remote environment, and which ones are nice to have, which ones are need to have? Like, how do you propose thinking about that?
I think a second monitor is a big one. Comfortable chair is actually a really underrated one. Bouncing back and forth between sort of wired headphones and maybe AirPods or Bose wireless and stuff, it's interesting. Those won't last your whole day, and if you're on Zoom calls or you're on WebEx calls for 10, 12 hours, sort of, if you're trying to go the wireless route, you probably need some type of backup there. I think the lighting is really underrated. You're absolutely right. And I walked out of a 12-hour day of video calls, and my daughter was staring at me, and she went in and got me the blue light glasses and said, you need to start wearing these, because if you're going to stare at a screen for 10 hours a day, things like that become really important.
My thinking on this, frankly, is that companies and financial services firms in particular should spend some time thinking about what the standard package is, what the deluxe package is, and what the basic package is, and kind of map that to employees, only because otherwise you're going to end up in a scenario where, my thing broke, can you fix it? And suddenly IT or AV is trying to fix some mic that they've never heard of remotely.
A pause for a word from our sponsor. Verizon is proud to sponsor this Executive Tech Talks episode on work from home, return to the office. We assist our clients in helping their employees adapt to changing work environments while providing industry-leading approaches to collaboration, security, and connectivity. With over 132,000 employees, Verizon itself has 3 return-to-the-office models covering work site-based, home-based, and hybrid that fall under our Work Forward program. Verizon looks forward to engaging more with listeners of this episode on these and other topics in the near future. A quick disclaimer. This third-party advertisement does not constitute an endorsement, guarantee, warranty, or recommendation by Executive Tech Talks, Nemertes, WSTA, today's guest, or their company. We make no representations or warranties about any product or service advertised. With that, back to our show.
Thanks very much to our sponsors. And James, let's pick up where we were. What about some of the farther out ideas for working from home? Things like virtual reality and augmented reality. I would assume that's something you guys are looking at. Obviously, I'm not asking for any secrets, but what are your thoughts about this sort of far out stuff?
I was reading about sort of some of the really natural cases for that, like, fighter pilot training came to the top of the list as, the article I was reading, I guess it's the government, so estimates vary, but $10,000 to $40,000 an hour they can save in a virtual environment versus getting a fighter pilot up in the air and, having her fuel up and do all the things that she ultimately needs to do up there to be successful. I think the idea of sort of an augmented reality or virtual reality in the financial services world is fascinating because it's not the overt costs like there are with fighter pilots, but you think about the time commuting to the office, you think about insurance and office space and other things. The dollars can absolutely sort of add up. People are, from my perspective, craving that interaction that the video is great and it's great. And you and I have been on a couple of video calls through this and it works, but it doesn't work for all things and it doesn't work all day, right? And I think to me, the main use case that would be super interesting there was that sort of, could you virtually get up and walk over and sort of, tap on somebody's door or hit them up at their cubicle and see if they've got 5 minutes for that sort of impromptu conversation? And we've certainly seen across financial services, a lot of clients really like these, quasi-virtual, the video interactions versus sort of in person. And you've got a lot of clients that would much prefer, provided conditions allow to sit down face to face and shake hands and really sit down and talk through the details of a financial plan. It makes sense on that spectrum that there are those who this sort of hybrid virtual augmented model would be something of interest as well. So I think there are probably a few different use cases there. And as we know, with the pace in which this technology is evolving, it's not decades away, right?
Right. What are your thoughts on the necessity of returning to the office and the timing of returning to the office?
The biggest thing to me is there is not going to be a one-size-fits-none approach to this because there are so many different factors people are dealing with, home lives and family lives, things that have changed, children in school. So I think flexibility is going to become really important. And even if you really dig into some of the messages that people are saying about it, it is sort of centered around there are certain things we need to be in the office to do better. And I would say there's no doubt that that's true. I think there are certain collaborative activities where we've at least found being in person to do those whiteboarding sessions, being in person to have sort of those mid-sized meetings where you can really interact and go back and forth. And you can certainly do some of those things virtually, but we found sort of some of the efficiency gets a little bit lost there. At the same time, there are things people are probably more productive doing in a remote environment where they're not, commuting for maybe an hour or so a day on either side, and they can really just sort of dig in and get to work and knock that out. So I think being flexible is going to be really important. I think rolling with the punches is going to be really important, depending upon sort of what's out there from a health perspective, what sort of happens from an overall sort of employee sentiment perspective as those employees are craving a bit more flexibility. And so, in short, I think we should be back to sort of some level of this new normalcy sort of in the fall, but I think it's going to take a while to play out to figure out exactly what it's going to look like to really be successful.
So if we can agree on the characteristics of interactions that do require being in the office, then clearly if financial services needs it, the rest of the world will probably agree. And that's where I think we get to be a bit of a bellwether. That said, I would challenge you not but to disagree with you, but to characterize those interactions a bit more, because you were careful. You said mid-sized interactions, with sort of what I got the vibe of was maybe half a dozen people clustered around a whiteboard, that's difficult to impossible to replicate effectively in virtually. Is that accurate? Did I pick that up correctly?
Yeah, that's where I was going. The big sort of update calls that you do with 25, 50, 75 people, I think are quite efficient virtually, right? I think the one-on-one interactions are quite efficient virtually. I guess those, you're right, half dozen to a dozen, sort of the old, Jeff Bezos, sort of a team that can split a pizza type of thing. Were just some of the interactions, the word you use for sort of those real natural interactions are just a bit easier. I saw one of the famous venture capitalists posted a tweet a couple weeks ago about sort of perceptions of could you have built the iPhone from scratch in a completely work from home environment? And there were a variety of different opinions on that. And I think sort of where it sort of coalesced, if I could, was you probably could, but it probably would have taken a lot longer and been a lot harder to do so. And I thought of you when I read that, because I would have expected if you'd seen that, you would have pushed back pretty hard that they might have been able to do it easier. But I think especially in the early stages of product development and stuff, some of the sort of newer things, I think you'll find in financial services maybe some more efficiency there versus there should be, I don't think, any debate now that in a BAU environment, we can be just as good as we were virtually versus in the office, because we've really all been doing it for the last year and a half.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think my response to that would be, of course, they couldn't have built it as well or as quickly with the technologies that were available then. I think the wild card is the technologies that we have now or shortly coming down the pike, which, I'm convinced are going to make it easier to interact virtually than in person. But we'll see. I know we're coming to the end of the show, so we have kind of a quick wrap up here. We've covered a lot of ground in a few minutes. What would your recommendations be for financial services firms as they navigate return to the office?
Yeah, you and I have been down this road before. You usually want one and one only. So I'm going to give you what I would consider to be the next degree of flexibility, which is malleability. Be incredibly malleable. Take input from your employees, take it from your leaders, take it from your partners, take it from the health experts, take it from the technology experts. I don't think any of us have the answer to this question exactly right. And I think the most successful firms are going to be the ones that are taking all of this input, are adapting on the fly, are changing on the fly, are being humble and showing humility of, hey, I thought I knew this, but you know what? I don't think I know this anymore. I think those characteristics over the next 9 to 12 months are going to be sort of the key ones for the companies that get this right.
Wow, that was absolutely brilliant. I love the focus on humility, and I was listening and thinking humility in the eyes of a child and the mind of a child when you're approaching all this, because it's all new for everyone.
Well
Great
said.
way to end this session. Thank you so much, James, and thanks everyone for watching this. This has been fantastic.
Thank you, Johna. My pleasure.